Right, thank you everybody, and sorry we're a little bit late starting. So this afternoon's panel, we are looking at why is Northern Powerhouse Rail and HS2 vital to drive economic growth in the north. So we'll just start by way of introduction. So I'm Laura Collins. I was formerly editor of the Yorkshire Evening Post. I'm now publisher for National World City World brands, which includes over 12 different titles. So the YEP, Sheffield Star, Edinburgh News, you pretty much name it. We've got a city, including Newcastle as well. So I'll just do a little bit of a run through by the panel. So Alex, do you want to start?
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Alexandra Batey, and I'm Director of Development for HS2. What that means is that I'm accountable for the delivery strategy and the future planning for Phase 2B West, from Cllr to Manchester, but also for the future lines, looking to the north and looking at the capacity and the options that we can support the government on and Northern Powerhouse Rail for the future. Thank you.
Over to Councillor Gannon.
Good afternoon, everybody. I'm Martin Gannon. I'm the leader of Gateshead Council, which is the local authority just to the south of here, on the south bank of the Tyne. But I also chair the North East Joint Transport Committee, which is the strategic authority that looks after transport on behalf of the 7 local authorities, Northumberland, County Durham, and the 5 Tyne and Wear authorities.
Perfect. Dr. Roy?
Hi there, I'm Alex Roy. I'm Head of Policy at Manchester Airports Group. So we own Manchester Airport, obviously, but also East Midlands Airport and London Stansted Airport. My policy role is sort of broad in everything to do with how we interact with government on policy issues, but it does seem to involve an inordinate amount of surface access policy, including rail and HS2 in particular, because of the development of the HS2 and NPR station at Manchester Airport.
And then finally, but no means least, Emma.
Hi, good afternoon, everybody. I'm Emma Antrobus. I'm the North West Regional Director for the Institution of Civil Engineers, but I am representing all the engineers that we have across the north, which is about 15,000 members that we have, many of whom are working on both NPR and on HS2.
So I guess the big question to kick us off with is, what do you think we need more, NPR or HS2? Who wants to go first?
Is that me? Is it
It's open floor. Open
How
floor.
long have I got?
As long as you need, Martin.
Right, okay, well, I'll be very brief. Well, 5 minutes if you don't mind, okay? Welcome to Newcastle, the home of the railway. I know the conference is about high-speed rail, and I know it's about the Northern Powerhouse Rail, but I'm going to give you a perspective from the northeast of England. Okay, I lead Gateshead Council, and I lead on behalf of the authorities in the northeast of England. Biggest single issue for the northeast of England is not about speed. Okay, I sometimes despair that there's so much investment in rail going into the southeast of England, and if the government were really serious about high-speed rail, maybe they would have started from the north and worked their way south, because I certainly feel disadvantaged. If there's massive investment in high-speed rail going into other parts of the country, although I'd like to get to London 10 minutes faster, I'm a bit concerned by the fact that it economically damages us, that so much investment goes into the south, but doesn't take place in the northeast of England. But, being altogether truthful, I'm not really bothered about being able to get to London 10 minutes faster. The rail service to London from the northeast of England is absolutely fantastic. We have a fabulous service. It runs twice an hour. Okay, it shares dual track from Newcastle and north, but from Newcastle, my perspective, down to Northallerton, it's dual track. Okay, anyone who's been on the train from London coming north may experience on occasions when you're just outside of York Station that you stand waiting. I used to think it was waiting for a platform. But it isn't. It's because there's a viaduct at the far side and then beyond Northallerton. From Northallerton, it's dual track. That's the issue for the northeast of England. It's about capacity. So what you have is local trains, freight trains, and intercity trains running on that line. The only other line we've got in the region, of course, is the Tyne Valley line running through Gateshead, which doesn't connect at all in any integrated way with the rest of our transport services, and is operated by Northern Rail, but I'll concentrate on the East Coast Main Line. So you have, 6 trains an hour running on that line, 2 express trains, 2 freight trains, 2 local trains. That's the extent of its capacity. LNER ran a consultation. I'm sorry, I get waylaid with dates now because of COVID, but it was prior to COVID. I think it was 2018 they started the consultation on opening up another service to London, to increase the services to London to 3 an hour, 3 south, 3 north. Actually, in reality, there's sufficient demand for 4 trains an hour to London. Of course there is. It's a cash cow. Right? Okay? It would, and I don't blame LNER in the slightest for wanting to run more services Newcastle to London. The problem is you can't actually run that many trains on the line. They carried out a consultation, and when the results of the consultation came back, I knew right from the very beginning part of the proposal would have been to take off rail services to Manchester. Okay, so to reduce the direct services from Newcastle to Manchester. Incidentally, I often say jokingly that it's quicker to crawl on your hands and knees over broken glass from Newcastle to Manchester than to get a train. Okay, my experience is the number of times I've been tipped off a train in York or tipped off a train in Leeds, and I've been 2 hours late for the meeting I'm going to. Actually, the last meeting I attended of Transport for the North to do an appointment, I had to go down for an interview for an appointment for a director, had to go down and stay in a hotel the night beforehand because it was impossible for us to get there for 9 o'clock in the morning. Manchester, okay? So the proposal was to remove immediately one of the direct services to Manchester. But when the proposed timetable came back, to the consternation of many in the northeast of England, it proposed 3 trains an hour, but with less stops. I mean, obviously, if you run more express trains and you try and keep the freight and local services running, they run into the back of each other. You've got to reduce the frequency of stops. That meant less stops in Northumberland, a Conservative-controlled local authority, and also involved less stops at Darlton, a Conservative-controlled local authority, and where the government had made great play of the fact that as part of their levelling up agenda, they were moving jobs from Treasury to Darlton for Treasury North. Now, this is like manna from heaven for a Labour politician to be able to say to the good people of Darlton and the government that it's great to bring Treasury North to Darlton so they can go to Darlton train station and wave at the trains going past because they're not stopping anymore. Right? As part of, we have campaigned in the northeast of England, and I say that's not just the local authorities, it's the business community, it's the wider community as well, for the reopening of the Leamside line. Leamside line used to be the East Coast Main Line before it was driven on its current course. And it operated until, I think, 1991. So they used to use it for engineering works and relief when there was engineering works taking place. I can remember trains having to go around that way on a Sunday and that sort of thing. Okay? But it closed in 1991 and it was mothballed. The line of the line is preserved rather than the railway lines. There are short sections where the rail is preserved, but the majority of it, and it runs down through Washington and onto County Durham and connects at Ferry Hill. Okay, now that would give the capacity to be able to get freight trains and some local trains off the East Coast Main Line and run more express trains, or however the configuration is put together. It would also, in the northeast of England, give us the capacity to be able to expand the metro system. We're already in the North East Joint Transport Committee have put forward the business case for a Washington loop. Washington is, I think, the largest town in the UK which doesn't have a rail connection. I'm trying to remember the population of Washington. I think it's about 90,000. Okay, but it has no rail connection whatsoever. And we've put together the business case. It's going to be about £740 million, although the benefit to the economy is it will grow £90 million a year. Now, I think that's a really compelling business case to put forward to the government in terms of investment in opening up a Washington Loop, which would open up the north end of the Leamside line across the Victoria Viaduct and connect onto the existing metro system at South Hilton as well. So it would be a loop running through the area. We are putting forward very strongly from the region that we want the whole of the Leamside line opening, because that would give us the capacity that we need. It would also, in terms of the metro system, if I wrestle, as do the leaders of other local authorities in the region, with the issues of climate change, congestion, air quality. There's a air quality zone just opened in Newcastle because we are the levels of air pollution are at and have been for some significant period of time at dangerous and illegal levels. The 400 premature deaths a year in central Tyneside are caused by air quality. That's directly attributable. I'm sure there'll be, but the public health consequences of pollution are documented and well known. I wrestle with those issues every day. The secret, of course, is to improve public transport. And the majority of traffic that drives through my council area, Gateshead, okay, trying to squeeze across the Tyne Bridge, comes from South Tyneside, Durham. Okay, by reopening the Leamside line, you give the facility for people to use the rapid transit system. The line joins on at Durham and Ferry Hill, so you'd be able to use the Leamside line as extension to Metro, but also you might get capacity on the existing East Coast line, main line for Metro trains, which would connect the major suburbs of Gateshead, Lowfell and others to the Metro system as well. Go further than that, actually go beyond Ferry Hill, there's the Stilton line, so if you're connected there, the ambition of the Tees Valley Mayor, in fact, all the candidates who stood for the position of Tees Valley Mayor, all political parties, said they wanted a rapid transit system the same as Tyneside. Well, they're not going to get it unless we work collaboratively together to develop a northeast metro system, not a tiny metro system, a northeast metro system. Sorry, I went on too long probably. There we go.
But picking up about what you said there, Martin, and I think this is probably one for you, Dr. Roy, in terms of, looking at that improvement between the east and the west, how do you think sort of like that high-speed rail network between, particularly, I guess, when you pull in the likes of Manchester Airport, how can that help to unlock the potential for the north?
Yeah, I mean, I think going back to your original question of, which do you want, which is most important. At one level, we would always say that Northern Powerhouse Rail is most important to us. We see ourselves as the gateway for the whole of the north of England and much of the Midlands as well. And currently, it's far too hard to get from parts of the, other than by driving, but parts of the north beyond the northwest to the airport than it should be. And that's a marked contrast when you look at London airports and the rail catchments that those airports have. So improving that rail connectivity, and actually this is about speed, ironically, so obviously capacity is really important to that, but it's about making those journeys much quicker as well as much more reliable, which is where the capacity element comes in. But saying all of that, in a sense the question is a bit arbitrary now because we've taken the decision to build everything on the back of HS2. So it would be nice to say, well, perhaps we should have started in the north, perhaps we should have built HS3 as it was called first. But the reality is that HS3, as was, relies on the infrastructure of HS2 to be delivered. That's certainly true at the airport, where the station and the tunnel into central Manchester is part of HS2, and also the spur on to Liverpool ultimately is part of HS2 as well. So we need HS2 to be delivered in full. I mean, there's a question about the eastern leg, which I'll leave for others to talk about, but in full in terms of up to Manchester, because that really unlocks NPR, and NPR won't happen until HS2 is delivered, and that's where we think the real benefits for the north will really kick in.
So picking up on that about the eastern leg, sorry Alex, but do you think that that proposed shelving of the eastern leg could almost create a bit of a two-speed north for us?
So HS2, just to pick up on the other comments first, because I think it's important to look at HS2 and the plans for the North about what benefits we can actually bring to North across all transport, a fully integrated transport system. You talked a lot about app to travel, you also talked about the airport, and the aim for the North should always be a fully integrated transport network that enables that levelling up agenda to be delivered. In terms of the plans for HS2, the way we stage and we construct HS2 is really important. And as Alex said, that first question you posed about should it be NPR or should it be HS2? Well, obviously I'd say HS2 is fundamentally important, but Alex has already said the key statement here, that for HS2, we are constructing also 22 kilometres of the Northern Powerhouse Rail. We will be delivering parts of the Northern Powerhouse Rail to help unlock some of that. Now, there are future development of lines, and it is both high speed and capacity that is important. Picking up on Martin's point, capacity is really important, and that's what High Speed 2 is also going to offer. We need to ensure that we are taking some of the congestion off the local railways so there are more passenger journeys, so we can create some reliability. And also importantly for economic regeneration, we're opening up new freight paths by taking some of those passenger journeys and putting them on for High Speed 2. The pattern for High Speed is being that catalyst to bring regeneration, that catalyst to helping open up capacity to all of the big cities that need to have some regeneration, that need to have some levelling up, and need to have some focus around achieving what they best possibly can for their transport. So it would be really good, and we're working closely with the government to still look at that eastern leg. It's a really important part of the HS2 network. But both Northern Powerhouse Rail and HS2 are both really important. The second point I'd make in terms of connectivity and capacity is HS2 is also very much about helping regeneration. At the moment, we're employing 30,000 people in the construction industry, and construction is absolutely vital to helping the UK as a whole regenerate. There's more than just transport benefits for what High Speed 2 is doing, and there's more for just what Northern Powerhouse Rail is doing, creating more opportunities for local businesses, opportunities for apprentices. We have 2,000 opportunities for apprentices. And at our peak construction, there'll be 34,000 people working across the UK. In terms of businesses alone, something like HS2, we have businesses in Devon, all the way up to Dundee, and there are about 2,500 innovative businesses up and down the country working with HS2. So when you ask what is best in terms of for the North, it's all of those things come. And we've heard a lot today about this, there being a plan, a proper plan for levelling up, a proper plan for integrated transport that can bring those benefits of regeneration, sustain jobs, sustain transferabilities, and release a level of capacity that not only brings benefits to Manchester, the first station in the North that I'll be visiting under my jurisdiction, to Birmingham, but also to Leeds, to other cities in the North. Connectivity is unbelievably important to regeneration, and both High Speed 2 and Northern Powerhouse Rail will help deliver that.
Emma, do you think that the integrated rail plan is enough to bring the change that the North's expecting?
I think that's it's quite a difficult question, that, because there isn't as much evidence that backs up the IRP as perhaps had been there to create the transport strategy as was for NPR. So there are key bits in the IRP that have not made it from that original plan, and I think that's an opportunity missed. I think there's always the opportunity with plans that you don't have to shelve it as such. You can phase it and be a bit more creative, shall we say, with timing and funding associated. But I think the more plans that we have coming forward, the less time there is to get on and deliver, and that's always a challenge. I think the other thing that when there are plans, they have to have funding, and with items being included and then withdrawn from plans, it leads to uncertainty, to a lack of confidence. It means that companies won't recruit staff on that basis. So we then get skills shortages, we then get wage inflation, So none of it is very helpful. I think what we really want to see is one committed plan, a funding cycle that supports that, and then all the associated support, the skills development, the apprenticeships, will all follow through.
So picking up on that, and I guess this is an open question to anybody to jump in on the panel, but what further work and investment do you think is needed to really make this transformational for the North?
I mean, it has to be said that for, I think, universally, the view of the North on the publication of the Integrated Rail Plan was disappointment. Okay, I mean, I sat at a meeting of Transport for the North where the mayors, Andy Burnham and others, expressed the view that in some ways, although it was being dressed up by government as being, oh, we can deliver this in a shorter time frame and this is still considerable investment. I mean, from my own perspective, I told you, it is incredibly difficult to get to Manchester by rail. But the prospect of, instead of having a properly upgraded new line, and rather than having this piecemeal development, bit by bit, of the existing line over a 10-year framework, I mean, out of choice, I wouldn't use the system at all. But if there's going to be works along that line for the next 10 years, it just reinforces the correctness of my decision. It's absolutely catastrophic. Okay, the proposals as put forward by Transport for the North, which included the reopening of the Leamside line, I have to say, we had that was something which we from the northeast had to win support, because these plans were put together within a proposed spending envelope. It wasn't, what do you need? It's, what do you need for this amount of money? Okay, so, and we had to argue really heavily the case for the northeast of England to get that reopening of the Leamside line within that allowed spending envelope. So what needs to be delivered, I can't remember the amount, I think it was £43 billion was the original spending envelope. Right, what we want is Northern Powerhouse Rail delivered in full, because anything less doesn't deliver the kind of transformational economic growth that Northern Powerhouse Rail and reopening of the Leamside can.
Could I just jump in very quickly? There are two really good examples that I think underline exactly what you've just said. I'm old enough to remember the upgrade of the West Coast Main Line, which was devastating for those rail links for quite some time, and cost £10 billion, and was full again almost as soon as it opened. So just patching a Victorian railway has shown to work in the short term, but we cannot continue to look at short-termism for rail, because we end up where we are now, and that's the definition of madness, isn't it? And I think, just to underline your point about piecemeal approach, I worked for some time on trying to get investment into the Northern Hub, as it was called, which was a package of measures. They have built the Ordsall Chord, but didn't deliver the other items that were part of that package. And what we've done, or what we've seen, is that the congestion at Piccadilly has been moved down the line. So trains are actually slower now than they were, but you can get all the way round to get to Manchester Airport if you have an extra half an hour.
If you're lucky, yeah. I mean, that's a very good example of an area where we've seen the rail service actually go backwards, so the journey takes longer and it causes problems that then lead to higher levels of cancellation than you might otherwise expect to see. Sort of related but differently, services to Sheffield, for example, have been cut. So we're sort of looking at a system which, compared to where it was 5 years ago, is now actually actually in a worse place. And without the sorts of investment that were, partially set out in the IRP, but were fully set out in NPR, in full, if you like, you're not really going to see any step change in those things. So there's not really any plan for how a service like Sheffield, for example, which used to exist in the timetable to Manchester Airport, is going to be reintroduced in the next 10 years. And that was lost 5 years ago. So it's not that we're standing still, we're actually going backwards, and we need sort of a whole-scale rethinking about how we deliver rail services across the north and not just patching them up. I mean, just to illustrate the point about the West Coast Main Line, Virgin Red spun up during that time to fly people from Manchester to London because the train service wasn't reliable enough for people to use. That service then disappeared again when the rail service was reintroduced. At the moment, we've got sort of grand aspirations being touted around, like delivering HS2, still talking about NPR, but the reality is they're being chipped away at the bottom everywhere we go along. So things like the airport station, which still doesn't have a funding agreement, things like the arguments that Manchester are having around Piccadilly, which is a slightly broader question, obviously the eastern leg as well, but the electrification of various lines across the north, all of these things are being chipped away over time, because you don't have this grand scheme of actually this is what we're trying to get to. So everything is done on the cost of its individual component, and you chop it off because you can't afford it at the time, but you're not looking at the long-term investment potential that's delivered if you deliver everything.
So this might be a bit of a loaded question on the back of that, but do we think we'd be having this kind of conversation if we were in the south of England?
No. I mean, saying that, you wouldn't be having that in the southeast of England, operating an airport in Anglia. Actually, we have exactly the same sort of conversation. In a way, it's even worse because the investment that is going on outside of London is happening up here. so it's not that everywhere outside of the north is getting a great deal. It's everywhere outside of sort of core London and Commuterville is getting a bad deal, actually.
I think it just shows how important it is to have a clear funded plan and clear commitments, and we've been very fortunate in HS2 to have that clear commitment from the Chancellor several times now that we are going through to Manchester, and that makes a big difference in terms of business confidence. We have a lot of conversations with our supply chain about being HS2 ready. How can you be ready for HS2? How can we build on the benefits, not just for transport, for supply chain as well? And a significant step change like HS2 will create that capacity to build on in other areas such as transport. But that comes with funding, that comes with a clear commitment and a clear plan. And we're fortunate we've been talking a lot in HS2 about having that commitment all the way to Manchester, and that's really important to us. Because from day one then, I think, as you were saying, Emma, you can start to build that supply chain. And we've seen our suppliers in the north, 220 already in the north of England, starting to step up, starting to grow their businesses, create apprentices, and be ready for HS2 to come and really capitalise on any investment we can bring. And that's really important as well.
Because I think sort of like picking up on that, obviously we're talking a lot about sort of Manchester and how it centres around there, but I think, bringing it back, when you look at that eastern leg and the fact that there is the question mark over that eastern leg, I guess how do cities like Leeds and then onwards to Newcastle benefit from that when they see, the rest of the country enjoying that benefit?
So at the moment, there's 22 billion, numbers back to front, 22 billion pounds, must be very careful when we're talking about numbers, has gone into our supply chain. And that is not just in specific areas, that is countrywide, from Devon to Dundee. We do a lot of work with the East Midlands. We've got a lot of different companies in the East Midlands getting work. In Sheffield, for example, 3 Square, a brilliant company that's been based in Yorkshire. They're providing a lot of our software work. They're a tier 1 contractor. They've got a new 3-year contract that's enabled them to grow their business. We've also had in Hartlepool, we've got a new factory that's opened up to be precast concrete. Although HS2 is a single line, the economic ripple and the effect that we have on our supply chain, on our businesses, those 30,000 jobs rising up to 34,000 jobs at our peak, spreads at a much greater distance. And we're really seeing that. If you look at cities like Birmingham, yes, they've had a significant step change like we've been talking about in terms of HS2 arriving, but it starts a long time before that with our 30,000 jobs, with 2,000 apprentices, and that 23 billion already in the supply chain. And that is what we need to capitalise on all over to start that catalyst. People often say, how will the benefits be embedded? How will we make sure we install the benefits? Railway and good transportation are a catalyst. We need good planning, we need funding, but they are the catalyst for growth that needs to be built on for the whole of the north, not just for where HS2 is going. And you can see that in our supply chain up and down the country.
Martin, one for you, sort of picking up on that as well and talking sort of as passionately you have done about sort of like transport in the northeast of England. I think we all probably had a little bit of a joke when we got here to say, actually, yes, we probably came last night or we came this morning and there were a few rail cancellations on the way. I mean, I had a bit of a joke with one of my best friends at the weekend, the fact that it was quicker for her to get to London to Paris on the Eurostar than it was to get from Leeds to London in the first place. Do you think that there's a danger of perhaps undermining levelling up with the northeast sort of being left out on a limb, if you will?
As I said, the rail, I live in Gateshead, a mile away from Newcastle Central Station, so it's great for me for getting to London. But that's it. You know what I mean? It's like, you might as well get one of those pith caps, you know, and take on a safari if you want to go across the country. Okay, you can. That's the issue. Is that in terms of interregional connectivity, it's incredibly poor. Just one thing I will say, I'm not sure if this is just random thoughts that come out, but if we think the Transpennine Rail and Northern Rail is poor now, you haven't seen anything yet, because what the government is proposing is that their budgets going forward, although there's been massive increase in costs, inflation costs of 13%, that they'll have to plan their service provision going forward on exactly the same budgets. I mean, I don't know enough about rail income except to say that I know that in the north, passenger use has returned to pre-COVID levels, but in the southeast of England it hasn't. Right? So therefore, the surpluses that were generated in the southeast of England are not available to the Department of Transport, and that's why it's limiting the budgets for Northern Rail and Transpennine Express going forward. The only other point I'd make is that franchising has been a complete and utter disaster. The East Coast Main Line is now directly run, isn't it? It's the operator of last resort or whatever, okay? And I can't remember the number of operators. It was Virgin, it was Stagecoach, it was whatever, okay? And similarly with other franchises around the country, promises and commitments are made about the quality of the rolling stock and about the growth in usage, but they're never delivered, okay? The rolling stock is poor. They're not good. These companies are not going to invest. Sorry, the comparison I'll give is in the northeast of England, we operate our own rapid transit system, the metro, and we just took delivery last week of our, the rolling stock that ran on the metro have been really good from 1980, ran for over 40 years, but we're now investing in brand new rolling stock. £360 million, 44 new trains from Stadler 555 class vehicles. Yeah, there we are. That's the comparison between publicly operated and franchised.
So I think one of the things that this ties to, and Emma, I don't know if you'd like to pick this up, is all about talent. And when we look at connectivity and almost, I guess, that brain drain to the south to an extent, how do we look at really taking this seriously and tackling this?
It has to be a whole system approach. I think connectivity is a real fundamental in supporting that. I think Martin made the point, we have a number of world-class universities right across the north of England and some incredible research facilities, and yet we are still losing talent to the southeast because, I came from Manchester last night. I don't know what the distance is fundamentally, but I know kind of Manchester to Sheffield is 35 miles. Manchester to Liverpool, something similar. Manchester to Leeds, 43. Yesterday on the train from Manchester to Leeds, it took over an hour. Now, you know, when you compare how you might be able to drive, the M62 is not always that reliable either, but these are not big distances. We should be expecting better. We do expect better, but we're not getting it. I think by looking at connectivity, it's the first piece of the jigsaw, but we need that confidence that projects will go ahead, that things will improve, so that companies can start to invest. We have some of the, you know, some big employers in Manchester and Leeds and Newcastle, Liverpool, Sheffield, but actually we don't have that many head offices, and that's where careers need to be going to if they're going to fly, aren't they? So I think we have to be holistic. I think, was it, someone said this morning about one of the things that was done to try and help the NHS. It was Jamie Driscoll, wasn't it? The NHS asked the local authority to grit the pavements to stop the accidents, people slipping on ice. We are too siloed. Transport in its own department, you know, all overseen by the Treasury, but actually there doesn't seem to be that interconnection that says we are all citizens of the country. We all have fundamental needs, and we all want to be able to have careers in the places where we want to live.
Sorry for hogging it, but picking up on that point about the southeast of England, I mean, I'm sure I have a habit of just making up figures, okay? And if nobody checks, I get away with it, okay? But it's, I think, something like about a fifth or a quarter of the population live in London in the southeast. Something like that, okay? There was Evan Davis did a thing called Mind the Gap a few years ago, and the growth in GDP in the London and the southeast has been phenomenal. I think it's about 56%. Please check those figures. Of the GDP of the UK is now generated in London and the southeast. So it's hugely significant, a quarter of the population and over half of the GDP. When the then coalition government, George Osborne as Chancellor of the Exchequer, brought forward a whole series of, you know, after the credit crunch and the, you know, sort of austerity measures were introduced, he brought forward a whole raft of transport infrastructure investment, 20 or 40 billion pound, I can't remember the figure now. It was in the 2011 budget or something like 2011, 2012. 20, 40 billion pound. And IPPR, the Institute for Public Policy Research, think tank, left thinking think tank, but there we are. They brought out a report called On the Wrong Tracks, right? And they did an analysis of where that investment was going, okay? Now, of course, you know, the vast majority of it went to London and the southeast. These were existing capital projects that were brought forward to try and kickstart the economy. And it was £2,770 per head of population invested in London and the southeast. You know, you'd expect the vast majority of their investment to go into the southeast, quarter of the population of the UK. In the northeast, it was £5 per head, right? I mean, you can't buy a sandwich for £5, okay? Now, I expect the global or the aggregate amount, the quantum to be bigger for the southeast of England, but per head, £2,700 per head to £5 per head. The biggest thing, you know, I'm a local authority leader. I'm involved in regional bodies looking at economic regeneration and growth. How do we free up the massive economic potential of the north of England? It's two things. I mean, there's all kinds of things. They talk about, you know, the green revolution. They talk about the digital revolution. But ultimately, it comes down to two things: skills and transport. Invest in skills and invest in transport. Everything else is great. Everybody else is investing in the green revolution. Okay? Everybody else is looking at pharmaceuticals or whatever it might be. We're all competing on the same things. But the things that drive economic growth and regeneration are skills and transport.
Pick up on another point, because we spend a lot of time talking about the plan for the future, but how far in advance of the future? One of the things I've been learning about HS2, I've been there 6 months now, is they really do invest in their people. They do invest in their supply chain. But this is going to be a 2-decade construction program. For the next 20 years or so, we'll be moving north. So that means that our need for skills, our need for local people will be moving north as the railway builds. And I've talked a little bit about some of the examples we've already got today, the ones that we've got here and now, new companies across lots of different areas. And one of the interesting things about working rail is that rail does affect lots of different places. We talked about new trains. The new trains for phase 1 are actually going to be delivered by Alstom-Hitachi joint venture. And that's 54 new trains, and that's in Derby. And that's absolutely brilliant, because that's a £2 billion contract, roughly, and 500 direct jobs in Derby for the phase 1 in the south. As we move north up to HS2, we're looking for those SMEs, we're looking for those local people. And actually, when HS2 becomes fully operational, you then need people to operate that. And we're in some of our big depots and our big maintenance control rooms, they'll all be in the north, and we will need skilled people and apprentices. Building on transport's benefits, yes, it's about these initial benefits for the construction industry, those big contracts that I've talked about, that ability to expand, but it's also about having a long-lasting benefit regeneration, which is about, yes, the transport, but creating skills and jobs for the future as well. And transport does that, A, for its construction, the money we're spending now, the skills we're building up now. We're getting phenomenal input from around the world, from all other countries, about all of the state of the art, the innovation from the UK, which all helps to show the skills and talents of people in the UK. For long term in the future, we're going to need operational staff who will be up and down the line for the whole length of England, all the way up to the north, all the way down to the south, creating jobs in the maintenance depots, creating jobs for the drivers as well. And for me, yes, it's that initial transport and skills, and then it's about making that a legacy, making that regeneration for generations of people, not just the people who are here today. And that's really important at HS2, the lasting legacy, the skills creation, the jobs, the SMEs that we can support to be HS2 ready and grow beyond when we leave, and leave a legacy that has good transport, innovation, a fantastic reputation, and build on the skills that we touch in all the different local areas and further afield, like in Derby and like in Greater Manchester. There's one industry that was really brilliant. They hadn't had new apprentices, and they are, I'm just going to look to make sure I get it right, Booth Industries, which are in Bolton, and they do our doors manufacturing, and they've managed to take on a whole load of new apprentices. That's skills for the future. It's all absolutely fantastic work, and it's part of transport, it's part of construction, it's part of building better for the UK and making sure that we've got a lasting legacy.
I mean, I was just going to say, in terms of that sort of broader economic benefit across the whole of the north, as the airport, we do various bits of research, and we look at new routes coming in and the benefits that they bring, and we look at sort of visitors coming in as well and the benefits that they bring. And you see a real sort of boost from that international connectivity, be it in trade, in investment, in visits, tourism, academic links, students, and so on. And a real sort of a real economic impact there, but the problem is that that is not spread as widely across the north as it could be, and one of the reasons for that is because of the connectivity at the ground level not being good enough to help spread that, and you see a much wider dispersal in London because of those denser transport networks.
Sorry, Emma, did you want to?
Yeah, it was something that Alex was talking about in terms of legacy. I think, you know, yes, the hard infrastructure is really important, but I think one of the other things about HS2 and NPR to a point is actually it's about what it does to the place as well. And I know the Manchester one particularly much better than the others, but in terms of the master plan for the whole area around the stations, it's about providing a better environment, because the station, particularly in Manchester, wasn't in, you know, the nicest of areas, let's put it that way. But the regeneration that is happening around it is really quite profound, even before HS2 has put a spade in the ground up there. And I think that's what's kind of worrying about the eastern leg, that all the work that Leeds did particularly, you know, we don't want to lose that, because regeneration is really important. People deserve to live in good places, and we need businesses to be in good places as well. So I think, you know, there's the hard infrastructure of the railway itself, but then there's the softer infrastructure around it, in terms of what gets built or regenerated, to really make our cities thrive.
I mean, I made this point before, skills and transport. The thing with being old is you've been around a long time and you remember that. I remember before the M25 existed. And I remember some of the things that were being said at the time when the M25 was being thought of and developed. There was a lot of communities around the proposed route of the M25 who were saying, oh, we're rural communities and we don't want to have a, you know, and there was assurances given that there'd be no development around the M25. That land would, the communities would be preserved. Well, that went well, didn't it? You know, build a motorway, and it's like a field of dreams, isn't it? Build it and they will come. Okay, you build infrastructure, transport infrastructure, and jobs. It'll just like a black hole suck in jobs and investment because it's there.
So we talk a lot about what's to come for the future, and obviously we're talking sort of like potentially up to 2 decades before we see all this come to fruition. But what do you think is the one thing that we can and should be doing right now when it comes to really driving that economic growth in our rail network? What's our priority?
Well, I think it's reliability. We need to have a stable, reliable network that we can rely on. Sorry, that's double double meaning, isn't it? You know, you want to be able, you're booked on the train and it's going to turn up, and if for some reason you don't get that train, you know there is going to be another one along in a reasonable amount of time. That might in the short term mean that we have to cut back services, has already happened, but as long as we then get a stable service on the back of it. At the moment, some operators, and I won't name them here, we all know who they are, despite having cutback services, are not able to offer that.
Alex, do you want to jump in?
Thank you. So I think there are lots of things we can be doing now. Seeing commitments to projects like High Speed 2 is really, really important. Helping businesses by having a confident plan, as we talked about today, to make sure that we can plan for the future, make sure business can build themselves up and people know that there are jobs available and things coming like that. But for me, having a really strong funded plan for an integrated transport system across as much of the UK as we can would be a really, really positive thing. And for me, obviously, I'm going to say that starts with HS2. And we can build on from that for just creating such a brilliant transport network across Britain that we deserve in all parts of the UK.
I live my life by anecdotes nowadays. But about 30 years ago, maybe it's longer, 30 years ago, I went to Dusseldorf with work. And when I arrived at Dusseldorf Airport with a colleague, got on the taxi to get to the hotel. And I thought, oh, it's 5:20. It'll be rush hour traffic. It'll be absolutely hellish. Sid, who I was with, because I said to him, have you been to Dusseldorf before? He says, yes, but I've only ever seen it from the air. He was a pilot in the Second World War. I think he contributed to the wide roads, okay, but which he made a comment about, but thankfully the taxi driver couldn't speak English. But we got to the airport, to the hotel, stayed there, did whatever we had to do, and on the way back, I went to the desk and said, can you order us a taxi? And the guy looked at us and said, oh, I was stupid. Sorry, the first thing was, there was no rush hour traffic. It was wide roads with hardly, you know, they were clear. When I asked for the taxi for the way back, the guy looked at us as though I was stupid and said, but there's a station just there, right? All right, okay. So we walked along with our cases, went, and there was I can't remember, there was an outer circle and an inner circle, checked what time the train was, 8 minutes past 10 or whatever. I think it was 8 minutes past 10 or 8 minutes past 11. And there was a stall there selling bratwurst and that, so I needed to get some stuff to take back. And the steps went up to the platform, and as I stepped up onto the platform, the digital clock went 11:07:08 as the train was pulling in. And when he got on the train, there wasn't a speck of litter or dust. They were completely clean. So what did I learn? Right, I learned that, and they were, it was about reliable, affordable, clean, and safe. That's it.
Emma, what do you think is the one thing we should be doing right now?
I think we need to speak with one voice about the North. I think we need a good plan. And fundamentally, we have to work with what we've got. But it doesn't mean that we have to accept what we've got. We can carry on working together to get what we want.
I think that's a nice way to round it off before we hand over for questions.
Rich Till from Arcadis. Question for Emma, I think, on skills. It's not a difficult one. I've got three 6 and 9 year old children. We're talking very long term here, aren't we? 10, 20, 30 years down the line. And there's a lot of talk about apprentices, about universities. And I suppose the question is, what are we doing around... There's only so much as a parent I can do around storytelling and encouraging people into the profession. So is that what more could we do as an industry for the very small children in the North to bring them and excite them about the industry?
Well, I can speak from ICE's point of view. We have a whole raft of STEM ambassadors that go into schools and scout groups and whatever. We have resources to try and inspire young people into at least understanding what engineering is, civil engineering in particular, but and as they get older, set out the fact that there are these huge long-term projects, and that actually in the UK we have a really strong legacy of training and producing some of the best engineers in the world, and engineering is a job that can take you all around the world, but there's plenty to do here.
I think it's so important for young children. My husband's a signalling engineer and I'm a civil engineer, and I've got two slightly older children now, but when they were young we said, what does mummy and daddy do? And we tried to explain it, and we got mummy cleans the station, daddy drives the train. And there's something really important about showing all sorts of people, all diverse types of people, young children, that there is a role for them in the transport industry. And I think someone mentioned it downstairs in the talk I was in, that to have a career in rail, for example, you can be a lawyer, you can be somebody who does strategy and policy, you can be in finance, you can contribute to the transport industry in so many different ways with so many different skills. And for younger children, you have to be able to show them in the terms that brings to them. So we've moved it on to daddy does the traffic lights, mummy builds the stations, which is a little bit closer, but they need role models that they can relate to. HS2 does a lot of volunteering days, we go into schools, but we've also created in a lot of communities viewing platforms so the children can come and see what's happening in their local environments as well. And for me, for younger children, it's about making something that's relatable and explainable to them. There's not many young children and people from diverse background or women's who would write in their diaries when they're 5 years old, if they can write, I want to be in the rail industry. So showing them a relatable role model, giving them access to the rail industry and the understanding of just what breadth of opportunities there are becomes really important, as well as for the apprentice, that relatable bit. And I hear there's a really great book called My Mummy's a Train Driver that has that I was at an EDI conference for women in rail last week, and they were talking about making Ladybird type books for children to understand the diversity in rail and the opportunities. So it's simple language for children who can really understand what it means and that there is a role for them somewhere in the transport industry.
We've got time for one more.
Hi. Hi, my name is Richard George, and I am, Martin, that operator of last resort, or whatever you referred to. A few things, comments I'd make. First of all, like you, I've got a very long memory. I've been on the railway since 1977. So I had 20 years of the central planning of British Rail, followed by 25 years of fragmented non-planning of the franchise railway. And a lot of the things that have been said this afternoon, some of which I disagree with, but most of which I fundamentally do agree with. And the fundamental thing I agree with is getting HS2, NPR, Eastern Leg, whatever versions come out. The fact is, in the march of history, these things end up being seen as a good thing. When you look at all the arguments that took place in the southeast of England over the Channel Tunnel rail link, as was, which became HS1, nobody wanted it, waste of money, where's the business case, absolute nonsense. Nobody says that now. It's just seen as a good thing, and how did we survive without it? And I think that's where we will be 40 years from now. So I'm absolutely supportive. I will pick you up on, yeah, as Operative Last Resort, I now run, well, as part of my group, we've got LNER and Northern and Southeastern. I don't think the Managing Director of Southeastern would agree with you that he's getting an easier budget time than my LNER or Northern colleagues are. They're finding life very difficult in the budgeted regime, as the rest of them.
The point I was making was that it isn't generating services. I think the budget situation for something.
I don't think any of them are generating services at the moment, apart from LNER. That's different.
Thank you for your support of HS2 as well. Always welcome.
Have we got time for any more, Jonathan?
Sorry, the first bit.
I'll ask mine anyway. Alistair Ford, Newcastle University. What needs to be done around HS2 to avoid the skills drain to London becoming more rapid, or the skills drain from the northeast of England just going to Manchester instead? So how do we make sure it's not just adding to the gravity of those economic centres that are already strong?
Yeah. So I think it's about having a diverse supply chain. It's also about the fact that we are moving as a company up to London, and we moved from London to Birmingham, and Birmingham will move forward up to Manchester. So I will look after the Manchester office, and we started looking at offices there. So that means we are moving north. But that diverse supply chain is about making sure that we give opportunities across the UK. And HS2 is being really good at making sure that we look at what skills and opportunities are already in the UK, how we can build on them, how we can support them. And this question about HS2 ready comes back a lot of time, which is, well, how can I play a part in HS2? How can we actually make sure that your companies are ready, that your universities are ready? And that's by having really good open relationships with the supply chain and talking about what we need. We work with a lot of universities around cultural aspects, whether it's environmental, carbon reduction, archaeology. And if we talk about what we need in terms of the supply chain, and we can give confidence to the supply chain about what we're going to need in 2 years, 5 years, 10 years, and where, it means that people can plan and we can be ready for that interaction. We don't look exactly where each company is. What we look for is the best company, and we look to help develop people. So that doesn't centre on a particular area. It centres on the best company, the ability to supply, and that is up and down the UK. And we're expecting a significant number of UK businesses to come forward and help deliver HS2, and that will be up and down the country. And I think I said before, our furthest away company is Devon, and all the way up to Dundee at the moment in the UK, and we're really centred on helping British businesses to develop.
I think there's another piece after that, or sort of whilst HS2 is being built, to really work with the universities and other education establishments to set and then to work with the bodies that bring inward investment, to talk to businesses that they can be confident in locating or growing within the cities of the north, that actually they will get the people they need, that they can thrive in our cities in the north. But it comes back to that confidence. It's about a whole system approach, and it's not a very exciting sort of way of describing it, but everything has to come together. And we have to work, use the combined authorities, the mayors, to really bang the drum to say, come to our city, invest in our city. We have the people, we have the places, and it can work for you. I think the point about, Treasury moving to Darlington, London and the South East are expensive places to live. Working from home gives opportunities. you know, that flexible working model is making a difference, but we still need good places for businesses and people to live.
And then final question to the gentleman in the red.
Well, if I just make a general comment, first of all, I agree there isn't enough investment in the north, but I'm originally from the southwest. It's the same problems down there. I mean, back in 2014, when the Dawlish seawall all fell in, they were promised a second route between Plymouth and Exeter. As yet, nothing. What are we now, 8, 9 years on, or whatever? But no, I mean, there's a lot I could ask, but obviously I'm conscious of the limited time. I'll basically just ask, you've talked about having Leamside reopened, partly for the freight services. What about also pushing to get North Allerton to Ripon to Harrogate reopened? Again, that would take a large part of the freight off between North Allerton and York. Take a lot of freight off the East Coast Main Line.
Ooh, I was going to say we have a complete and utter void in terms of regional and industrial policy. Right? I mean, I'm old, but you have to go back a long way, even before me, to see government having a coherent, strategic, industrial and regional policy. Right? So, and I'm not an economist, right? So I'll struggle around this, except to see, personalise it. I've only got one child, okay? I've admiration that you have 3, okay? She's at Sussex University at the moment, studying geography. She's going off to Los Angeles next week to go and study water management. And I keep on sending her emails for the Northumbria Water graduate programme, okay? Because I want her to come back to the northeast of England. Petrified that she's not going to come back to the northeast of England. Wanted to come back to the northeast of England. And you mentioned the issue about brain drain, okay? It's like there's a kind of economic dysfunction taking place, right? Okay, and someone mentioned the huge costs, not just economic but social, in terms of that overheating that goes on in London and the southeast. Go to King's Cross and go and look at the developments. You know, Google has its world headquarters and Apple and all these, and all the graduates just get sucked into it. Okay, the costs are absolutely astronomical. But I'm not an economist. There's this term, agglomeration, is that the right term? Yeah. Right, where it's like a black hole, it sucks things in. I've got to go there because they're there. Okay, it's like Nissan came to the northeast of England, and every single Japanese investor after that came to the northeast of England. That was an issue around skills. You know, the shipyards and the mines had closed, and there was a surplus of labour, and with a culture of work. That's why they came. Okay, right, but. Yes, there's this. To me, it's irrational, and it's dysfunctional economically. Okay, that there's huge, massive potential, but what we've got to do is to secure the investment in terms of transport infrastructure and in providing our workforce with skills. Okay, and then, as I say, like field dreams, they will come. Now, and I agree with all the points about further investment in, you know, I mentioned the Stillington line, and there'll be many, many others where the economics of that make sense. We've been looking at the Leamside line north, as I've said. It's £740 million, but will generate £90 million of economic growth annually. And we're also got an element of work taking place at the present time around the issue of trying to make a land value capture. You know that put simply, as I say, the land around the proposed line will massively increase in value if the line is built. So we have consultants at the present time going out and speak to the landowners around there about, well, you know, are you prepared to enter into a contract so that a proportion of that land value uplift would help towards the capital cost of the scheme. So, you know, the economics of these things, if you've got the will and the imagination and the political will to do these things, these things will happen.
I think one last thing on that point, and I think it's really interesting, so it jumped into my mind about our offices in Birmingham, and there was a bit of a survey done, and for Birmingham, where HS2 is going to be first, from London to Birmingham, we've had HSBC, Deutsche Bank and PwC either expand or move to Birmingham, citing connectivity as one of the primary reasons. And I just think that does build the case to your point around
freeing up the capacity, freeing up the connectivity, building HS2, having those plans, there is evidence already in places like Birmingham that that transformation has happened. It has been transformational to Birmingham, and it can be for the rest of the north of UK as well.
I feel like that's a nice place to leave it. So thank you, Alex, and thank you for your time. Appreciate it.